What day is it?
It's my birthday.
It's good to share. But check you have the right privacy settings. Or someone can make a lot of money from being you.
Panel, thanks very much indeed. Our first witness is Peter Hitchens, the author and columnist for the Mail on Sunday. Peter, 6 out of 10 of us are comfortable regularly using bad language, apparently. Does it matter, do you think? Or is it one more sign of the world going to the dogs?
Well, it matters in several ways. One, I think people who swear a lot get less good at expressing themselves because they use these words instead of trying to be inventive with language. More importantly, I think that swearing is one of those barriers between normal behaviour and danger. It's a warning of violence and trouble, and it should be reserved for that. And like all taboos, we keep it for a reason. It's something we hold back on because once you've started doing it, you've changed the whole atmosphere of the circumstances you're in. There are places where swearing has to happen. I come from a naval family. I have absolutely no doubt that if anybody in the Royal Navy had been standing on the bridge of one of His Majesty's ships and the person next to him had his head taken off by a shell, it would have been seen as perfectly reasonable to do a bit of swearing. But on the other hand, the same person would almost certainly never have done so in front of women or children because it was not the right time or the right place for it.
OK. Giles?
Are you, to use your words, inventive with language when you hit your thumb with a hammer?
I try to be, yes, actually.
That sounds really.
I don't see why you shouldn't be. I try not to use the obvious expressions. If you discipline yourself when you hit your thumb with the hammer, then you're more likely to say something useful, and more likely not to say something stupid when you're in a public place.
But isn't there a function of that seems curious to me because
I don't hit my thumb with a hammer very often.
No,
I have to say.
no, but you understand what I'm getting.
So far, I've managed to avoid doing that.
But you understand what I'm getting at, Peter. So what I'm really trying to say is that there is a sort of function of language which is expressive, which, you talking about it's not very clever to swear, and I've heard that quite a lot. But isn't actually part of the function here not to go through some sort of filtered, cultural, sort of sophisticated North London linguistic turn and actually just come out with it?
Well, maybe so. Oddly enough, I think that when things get really bad, the best response we can have is to stay completely calm. I was always impressed by the story of King Edward VII, who, when a chair collapsed under his very considerable bulk, said only, "Bless my soul," which most people would probably have gone further than, because he'd been trained from his earliest youth to restrain himself in what he said. But stay calm when you're in circumstances of danger or pain. It's a good thing to do. Why not?
I'm trying not to make this personal, Peter, but that sounds a bit buttoned.
Do please make it personal.
I'm trying to be polite here, but
don't do that either.
Hang on, let me just come out with it. Let me come out with it. It sounds a bit buttoned up, Peter.
Well, yes, I am buttoned up.
Yes, now and
I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that. I've seen society unbutton itself during most of my life, and it's got coarser and less pleasant to live in as a result. I think people who are buttoned up are the people you very badly need, especially when things are not going too well.
But buttoned up people generally find it very difficult to talk about their emotions or to talk about the sorts of things that some of the sort of personal things that actually seem to be terribly important for our mental health.
It doesn't we find it difficult to talk about them, it's just that we don't think it's necessarily terribly useful. It's often rather boring for other people to have to listen to it. It's just a wholly different attitude towards life.
No,
I promise you, Giles, that if I swore at you, which I'm quite capable of doing, and I have a reasonably inventive, filthy vocabulary, you'd know all
I'm
about
pleased to hear it.
It would be a strong signal that you had gone too far.
Yes.
OK, that's a good place to stop you. and McElvoy?
I was interested, Peter, in the idea that it was sometimes appropriate to swear and sometimes not. And you drew the line in some places now that people might disagree with. One was sort of swearing in front of women. Well, I suppose a lot of people might say, well, sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander, we should all be able to swear equally. Do you agree with that?
No. in my upbringing, there was a definite distinction made, and not just in mine. If you had gone to the now vanished pit villages of Yorkshire in the 1970s, men who swore extremely inventively and volubly during their working life down in the thin seam would come up, and when they went out on the Friday evening with their wives, they would never omit a single one of these syllables because they simply thought it was wrong. I happen to think that wasn't a particularly bad arrangement.
But that's a matter of opinion, isn't it? You happen to think, as you say, and you're absolutely entitled to say, well, I think this, of course, but I'm just trying to say, is there any sort of moral dividing line here? Or is it a kind of hypocrisy, in the sense that I also practice hypocrisy of my own, that sometimes I just feel like being very sweary. And then when one of my children drops a word, either one I don't like, or it's in the wrong context, it's a dinner table or in front of someone older, I really pick them up on it. And I suppose I'm just inquiring whether we are being a bit hypocritical or just having a double standard around the whole idea of swearing.
No, as usual, we're choosing what kind of society we want to live in. I think fundamentally swearing is about violence. It's about a warning of impending violence. And when I was taught to swear in Russian, when I learned a bit of Russian before I went to Moscow, and my Russian teacher, who was a woman, refused to teach me the words and deputed the job to a male colleague. And he, after he'd solemnly described and explained all these words and expressions to me, said, "Now you must solemnly promise me never to use any of them at all, because you're bound to get it wrong. The whole question of swearing in Russian is all about power and violence, and if you make a mistake about who you swear at, you'll get yourself killed." It was that important.
Suggesting,
and I think that is an illustration of how powerful this form of language is. We don't necessarily take it as seriously as we should here anymore, but I think we should. We devalue it by not taking it seriously.
We seem to be suggesting, or the suggestion is already in this debate to explore as we go along, that things have got worse on that we swear more. And indeed, the research seems to say so, that we swear more strongly. And yet, funny enough, I was just looking back at Luther and his use of language, which, as you know, is extreme and is imaginative, but he also swears an awful lot. In fact, he introduced a lot of what we consider to be modern swear words into the discourse from 16th century Germany onwards, whether it was about things to do with your bottom and defecation, the prostitute of heretics, he says at one point, and that's even missing out the bits that he built around it for extra impact.
Well, I'm not sure people do swear more strongly because they swear more often, as you said to begin with. In fact, I think that's a big distinction. I think swearing has become much weaker, in effect, because we do it so much more. I have heard a 75-year-old lady, a tiny bird-like woman, use the words "go away" with enough force to scare away the devil himself, far more than if she'd used the F word. And I think people underestimate the power of ordinary language when used. And if I say excrement, actually, I think it has a much more potent effect in the conversation than if I use the incessantly used word beginning with S, which everybody now uses instead.
Yeah, but it was Luther what started it. It didn't just happen when society went to hell in a handcart sometime in the 70s.
Well, I'm not quite in the hell in a handcart position, but I think there has absolutely definitely been a very strong decline in manners.
Peter Hitchens, thanks very much indeed. Our next witness is Rebecca Roach, who's a senior lecturer in philosophy.